Strategies to prevent divorce and rebuild your marriage. Welcome back to another live Wednesday training where every Wednesday I go live talking about new ways to improve your marriage, fatherhood, and some of these tactics and strategies, they're not only isolated to your relationship because there's no such thing as work-life balance. So improving your health, your wealth, your relationships, they're key because none of these things are compartmentalized. They all bleed or leak energy. And so if you're not taking care of you, you're not living the highest version of yourself or the most fulfilling life you deserve. And so in this week's trainings, we're going to be talking about these big ideas or pillars. Why divorce is inevitable, the history of marriage, why divorce is so hard on us emotionally, and what actually happens in the brain. We're going to go into effective communication techniques and what you should say if your wife asks for a divorce, how to rebuild trust and intimacy, and some conflict resolution strategies. Now, I'm also going to give you a 5-step framework or script. So if your wife says, should we get a divorce? This is what you're going to say. And if she says, I want a divorce, that's going to be a second script that I'm also going to give you. So stay to the end of the video. You're not going to want to miss it. Now, last week, if you missed the training, we talked about why almost half of marriages fail, according to a recent Forbes 2024 article. The actual financial, emotional cost of divorce, the top reasons that most relationships end, and the top professions that make you more susceptible to divorcing. So you're not going to want to miss this. This is going to be a five or six part series. I haven't decided about the cost of divorce, what to say if someone decides to initiate, if one partner decides to initiate a divorce, what are the things to say? How can you prevent it? And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to go into also the financial things and the legal ways that you can actually protect yourselves so that you don't get blindsided and you can mitigate some of those damages. Because I know that's a big question on a lot of guys' minds and women as well. So my name is _J_J_J_. If you guys don't know me, I'm a best-selling author. I was a former first responder for 15 years. I've been married for 12 years and I have 2 young kids. And after 10 years of marriage, my marriage was on the brink of divorce. And I radically was able to change it in just 3 months. And here's the crazy thing. Prior to changing my marriage and my fatherhood, I was already a life coach. I was already someone who had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal development. I did 4 years of therapy and still my marriage sucked. I had no connection with my kids and I thought I had done it all. And I really felt like there was nothing left to be done, which I'm sure many of you feel that way. And I had reached this point where I really believed that at this point, my wife and kids were the problem. There was nothing else left to be done, but I was wrong. And I realized after and through my transformation that there was an actual system. There was a framework that you could help men and teach them how to do this. And that's what I'm on a mission to do, to help them build unshakable marriages and deeper connection with their kids in just 90 days. Now, let's jump into this week's training. Here's the problem with marriage. We are set up to fail. That's right. The idea that marriage and relationships, here's the thing, guys, it actually stems from an idea of living happily ever after. Well, the very idea of this came from the romantic tales in Venice, Italy, around in the 1500s. So it's only 400 years ago. Now, during the Middle Ages, marriages were arranged. And so sometimes as early as birth. And these early pledges to marry were often to ensure treaties between different royal families, nobles, heirs, and fiefdoms. So mating and marriage was not about love. It wasn't about happiness. It was about land, trade, commerce, power dynamics. Before this time, marriage was about survival and the deep human need to be safe and secure. Now, in the 1500s, life expectancy was also typically less than 40 years. So the majority of Europeans were dead before even their 16th birthday, at least 60% of them. So there's no shock, there wasn't a lot of divorce back then, right? And in the 1520s, also, it was illegal for a noble person to marry outside of his or her social group. So hence the idea to live happily ever after has been romanticized because for most of us, it's just unattainable. The very idea that marriage in the past was then constructed so people could continue to stay wealthy and form allies. It had nothing to do with love. Men also, we know this, they are wired to procreate, period, which is why you see so much cheating and infidelity and so many issues in a marriage early on, most likely. And especially when men's testosterone is raging early in their 20s and 30s, right? It starts to see a dip, obviously, in the 40s. We still see infidelity, no doubt, because men are, they're just wired to procreate. They're wired to mate. And so it's always like, is it better over there? Should I do that? And so now you have not only the fact that marriage was just constructed for reasons not even close to what it should be, which is love and connection and community, but we also have a DNA hardwired in us to procreate. So now you have these clashing forces, right? I want to talk about now the emotional impact of divorce and actually what happens to the brain. Because some of you might be leading towards divorce. I coach a lot of men in this space and women too in our couples coaching with my wife, but we see a lot of turmoil and angst, and I hear a lot from the other side what one person is doing to try to sabotage and just kill and crush that person who they might have had some very good times with. But here's what you want to understand, and this was actually in a recent TED Talk with Dr. Helen Fisher, and she describes this unfortunate irony that what happens in our brains after being spurned by the one that we love. And she says, for the part of the brain that became activated when we fell in love, it's the exact same part of the brain that becomes even more stimulated when we are rejected by a lover. So rather than allowing us to do the sensible thing and just turn our attention toward starting a new life, our brains are hardwired to increase our desire for the one that we are losing, keeping us torturously entangled. And as we desperately try to turn around the Titanic around in this frenzied and highly focused state of craving, want, and longing, we can't. Dr. 𝘔𝘢𝘳𝘳𝘪𝘢𝘨, he's the author of The Neuroscience of Human Relationships, Attachment and the Development of Social Brain. He's also a professor of psychology at Pepperdine, and he said the brain's primary mission is to keep us safe and ensure survival. It doesn't care about how much our spiritual aspirations or our noble ideals or our self-image of being nice and loving to people. As the brain is a social organ and hardwired to stay connected, it's not necessarily prone to letting go easily of a primary attachment. In the brain's world, it's better to have a negative bond than the existential death of no bond at all. And so even if you know deep down inside that leaving is the right thing to do, even if you have 5 times as many bad days together as good ones, even if the lies between you are making you physically sick, the brain still doesn't want to let the relationship go. And this is why it's so hard, guys, to let go of our loved ones. This is why we get so crazy and spun out and just want to get back at them, right? It's all happening in your brain. We are hardwired for this. So don't feel guilty, but just understand if this happens to you or if your lover is doing this to you and you're like, why are you doing so much? Like, we had some good times, but like, let's just peacefully resolve this. It's probably not going to happen. You have to expect that this is probably what's going to happen based on just the way the brain is programmed. Also, in a study done at UCLA, which was not that long ago, Dr. Naomi Eisenberg and Matthew Lieberman, they discovered that being rejected by someone we love triggers the same alert in the brain as a primal threat. And this reminds us that in early times, being part of a tribe was essential for survival, and expulsion from the clan could signify a death. And this is why, again, we are social beings. So being let go and ostracized from our tribe, it is detrimental, and the brain just sees it the same as dying. And so you and I know that this we understand this as the intense sense of panic, and it can grip all of us and cause our hearts to be racing when our lover threatens to leave. We get terrified. We think we're going to die if we're rejected by the one that we love. And contrary to popular belief, time does not heal all wounds. We do. So you want to treat your broken heart with the same amount of care that you might offer your broken leg. So I really wanted to go over that and cover some of the brain science so you can understand either what you might be emotionally feeling if you're the one who's instigating the divorce, but also what your lover how they might respond. Because I think a lot of people are surprised, like, how did this person that I love so much, why are they treating me so poorly? And why do they want to hurt me so bad? And it's actually just the science shows it's actually pretty normal. And now we need to think about how we can show up the best for these people in a divorce state, or if we're going that way. Now let's answer the big question in this training, which is, should you stay or should you go? Now, if this question, if it pops into your head and you haven't even broached it with your significant other, I want you to think about this. If that's even going through your head, you need to think right now, get and see someone else, see a counselor or a coach that can help you make a wise decision. That's step number 1, because most of us are in our head, and our brain will always agree and find a good solution, and we will then double down on that and think, well, that's a great idea because I came up with it. It's super logical, even though you probably triage all the pros and cons And maybe it is logical, but your brain is very biased to you. So always get third-party help from a professional. That's number one. And also, if it just comes up that your wife or husband wants to leave, I think you should definitely give this a go first and have someone audit your marriage, audit your life first before you decide that, because you do want that unbiased to come into your life. So just be open-minded enough to put aside and explore possibilities, right, of working out your marital problems rather than breaking up the family prematurely. You want to know that you did everything you could, right? The second thing to decide if you should stay or go is share your feelings with your spouse without shaming or blaming, okay? Give them a chance to just to hear what is in their heart and then respond in a way that would eventually save the relationship. And a lot of us will skip this step. We only let someone know how serious things are by announcing that the relationship is over, right? That happens all the time. Like, we might have been thinking in our heads, like, I gave my husband plenty of little signals and little hints, but then it's like, boom, out of nowhere. I hear this from a lot of guys. They feel blindsided. They're like, what? How is this happening? I was working so hard. I thought everything was going great. I thought I was doing what you wanted. But they were missing a lot of little things that started to add up and be big things. And so up to that point, we've probably been quietly seething, nagging, complaining, and we're thinking that we're communicating. That is not communicating, because we know that studies show over 90% of communication is actually nonverbal, meaning that your nasty, condescending tone of voice, your hostile, contorted facial expressions, also known as resting bitch face, right, RBF, will register long before the words that you're actually saying. And so this actually leaves your partners feeling belittled, badgered, and often throwing them into a defensive state. So your man is not even hearing a word that you say, right? Most guys know this. These nagging, I talked about this on an older training on building a complaint-free marriage. If you look back at that training, we talk about nagging and complaining. They're like the number one things that destroy men and takes them out of the masculine, because men want to know that they are doing good, like a dog, good boy. They want to know that they're doing well. And if they feel like they're not, criticism is probably the biggest thing that destroys a man. So nagging and complaining, don't get this confused with that you're initiating some kind of authentic or serious dialogue, because it's not going to get the results that you're hoping for. And you know this, but you chalk it up to being authentic and I'm being vulnerable and I'm just speaking my mind. Well, that's fabulous. And not saying that you can't, but think about that. If you know that 90% of tone is how we interpret language and how we interpret what's happening to us in our world, perception is reality. That's just the fact of the matter. Think about your tone. Don't tell me something like, I'm not going to change my wife used to say this, I'm not going to change my tone for you. That's ridiculous. I'm changing who I am. Yeah. We're in a partnership. Yeah. You might have to change your tone. I might have to change the way I operate with you so that I can be received and I can actually signal to you safety, right? And so we all make compromises, and that's the key to building an unshakable marriage, is making some of those compromises. Number 3, though, guys, you got to create an action plan. So if your partner agrees to take action based on your concerns, just look to match that effort. You know, they did a study out of Rutgers University. It was called the State of the Union, or the State of Our Unions. And it showed that only 38% of married people in America described themselves as being happily. So apparently we don't have our relationships all that easily, right? So again, most people, we see it all the time. The Joneses, they're smiling over there, but they are the same people that out of nowhere were like, hey, the Joneses just got divorced. Like, I thought everything was going well. They looked so great on their front, the front that they were giving, right? All right, I'm going to end this training and we're going to dive into communication 101 and how you can resolve some of these conflicts. If your wife actually says something like, should we get a divorce, or I want a divorce, here's some things you might be able to say to stop that and put that on halt until you can actually come up with a solution and stop that. I get a lot of guys that reach out to me in the DMs. I say, hey, what's going on in your marriage and your relationship? And they always tell me, my wife wants to separate, my wife wants a divorce. And so I hear this question a lot, and so I want to answer it. Now, if your wife asks something like, should we get a divorce? My wife probably at least asked this question 6 times in the 12 years that we've been married, okay? And I wish I had known this information at the time. There's bits and pieces that I sprinkled in there, but it wasn't as cohesive as what I'm going to give you guys this time. Luckily, we were both too stubborn to admit failure and give in, and that luckily it gave us more time to figure things out, and that's what led us to where we are now. Now, here's something you're going to say. This is a 5-step process. Number 1, acknowledge the question seriously and calmly. So something you might be able to say is, I can see that it's really important to you, and I want to understand why you feel this way. So let's talk about it. Okay. Number 2, you want to express your feelings and commitment. I'm very committed to our relationship, and I want to find a way to work through this. I love you and our family, and I believe that we can overcome these challenges together. Number 3, you want to ask open-ended questions to understand their perspective. Can you help me understand what's been on your mind? What are the main issues or feelings that are leading you to consider divorce? This is a really good question, but be careful because you might get blindsided by your wife saying like, I've told you a million times. That's probably going to happen. She's going to release a lot of frustration and anger and angst. Totally fine. Let her do that. You actually want that to happen. She needs to release a lot of these things because it's just stuck in her and it's just raging that you don't understand and that you haven't tried to change it, that you haven't done any of the little things that she's asked, right? And so you asking, can you help me understand? Like, she's probably going to think that's a stupid question, but it doesn't matter. And she might even criticize you for it. But at the end of the day, this question needs to be asked because you do need to understand and say, hey, listen, you're right. I made all those mistakes, but I'm listening now and I can see how serious this is. And so I'm committed to this. Tell me, what are the main feelings? What are the main things that you want to consider that I'm not doing? And let me work on that, like seriously, over the next 3 months, right? And then one of the last steps, you're going to suggest professional help and support, right? So ask her like, hey, would you be open to seeing a marriage counselor or a therapist or a coach? By the way, therapy never worked for me. And most of my friends that used to be MFTs, therapists, marriage family therapists, they quit because it doesn't work. So do therapy if you think it'll work. Personally, I did it for 4 years and it's not what got me where I was at. I personally think there's a lot of really good coaches out there, including myself, who have been there, done that, and have done a lot of training prior that can get you there. But that's up to you. People know therapy. So if that's what you want to use as the language, people might feel weird about coaching. I don't. I hire so many coaches. It seems normal to me. But therapy might be more of a traditional route, even though I don't think it works. But tell them, I think, hey, listen, just say, I think having a neutral party could really help us work through our issues and communicate better. Then this is the final step. You want to reflect on your shared positive experiences and future goals. Hey, listen, we've been through so much together and had so many good times. Can we just try to remember what brought us together and see if we can rebuild from there? Because I want to find a way to reconnect and move forward. Here's the big thing with that one, right? And we forget this. And I don't think a lot of people do this. And something my wife and I talk about a lot is, and usually I hear it from the guy's perspective, women wanting a divorce, less so from the men. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but usually the men have been messing up a lot. And so we see the women saying, I want a divorce, right? Maybe it's just my clientele that comes out to reach out to me. But the fact of the matter is, you got to really sit with that idea of like getting a divorce. Like, you got to sit there and feel what it's going to feel like. And my wife said she used to do this a lot because there were many times she wanted to divorce me, but she sat there and actually felt what it would feel like to drop the kids off, be separated, to break up our home. Those moments of sitting there feeling that made her turn around and go, let me just give Joel one more chance. Let me give him one more time. Let me really try to work on this. I know Joel is capable. And so I think it's really important. And listen, we don't want to be an idiot. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. I get it. But it is one of the big things that turned our marriage around and gave me that one more chance, that one more opportunity to show her that I was the leader that she needed me to be. Okay. Now let's go into a different nuance, which is I want a divorce. Your wife asks you, I want a divorce. Here's what you need to say. But before we even talk about that, you need to understand the top 3 reasons that people separate in the first place. Because if you understand that, you can tackle these 3 issues most likely in your argument or your debate, or you can kind of break that down and start chopping away at those legs of the table. And that's going to help you understand that better. Now, why do people often bail in marriage? Well, usually people behave so badly that it's just damaged the fundamental safety of the connection, and it's violated a lot of the agreements that the relationship was founded on. So after trying a lot and navigating through what might just seem a lot of incompatibility or just ineffective and destructive communication styles, one or both parties, they just can't take it anymore. And so usually they feel like they're walking on eggshells, or they have this fear of upsetting their partner, or they're just chronically being misunderstood or not heard. And they're feeling like every time they talk to you, they're just being diminished every time they open their mouth. And eventually what happens is one or both people just stop talking, and you both accept that this is just the way that life is going to be. and no one's needs are being met. There's a fundamental disregard for each other. And so to fix this issue, I highly recommend studying communication. I have a communication course that I teach in my program, and I work on constantly with men, and we even practice with some mock communication. But you can also check that out on my free app. There's some, you can actually get access to the communication course, which is revolutionary. It changed my marriage. So I highly agree with that. The third most common reason, though, that we end our union is that we just seem to be growing in different direction. And so most people see this as a matter of changing interest or falling out of love. And what often really happens is people's core values begin to shift. And so think about it. We live in a world that's rapidly changing, and we're told that we get to be all that we can be. So naturally, the person that I met 30 years ago when I was in my early 20s, or this was just 20 years ago, when I was 28 and met my wife, the person I was at 28 is vastly different than the person at 42. My dreams, my goals, my passions, my jobs, I've evolved. All these things have changed. And so to expect that our significant other is not going to change is just a fallacy, guys. And so I think both women and men need to understand you're going to change, and that's okay. The key, though, is if you haven't fixed those first two things we talked about, right? The communication piece, right? If you haven't fixed that and you haven't been serving and leading your family, and your wife just feels like, dude, you're just doing absolutely nothing, and then you have regular communication issues, so therefore you have no connection, really hard to then this third piece to grow together. Because it's possible, and that's what I'm doing right now. We are growing together. Like, she's doing totally separate things, and she's embarking on a career in bodybuilding, which I have no interest of. I'm a health nut, but I'm not interested in being a bodybuilder. But I'm just like so enthralled by who she wants to be and like supportive, and like we're growing together. I'm learning from her. She's learning from me and the things that I'm doing. And that's the point. But if those first two things aren't working that we just talked about, then this third one's usually pretty easy to happen. You guys grow apart. I just fell out of love. Well, of course, because those first two things aren't working. But when you're in love, you're connected. You see each other, even though you're doing different things, you're just so engrossed in watching that other person grow and expand, and you want to be part of it. And that's what happened for us. So, and the game has changed, right? 50 years ago, it wasn't this way. Women were homemakers, and that was normal. Guys went out and made the bacon, and that was how society was. And so now women have more rights, and that's a good thing. But society's changed, times have changed. We've got to adapt and get better. So if this does happen to you, your wife says, I want a divorce. Now you understand those three things. You should probably attack it from that. But the first part you're going to want to do is when you bring up this subject and your wife says, I want a divorce, Joel, you're going to say this. Number one, you're going to take ownership for what's been going on, because she's going to complain about all the things that you did. This is why she's going to make a case like a lawyer. This is why I want a divorce, because you suck. And you never take out the trash, and you never take a shower, and you don't make enough money, and we're just growing apart. You're going to take ownership for everything that's happened, because the state of the union in your house is upon the man in the house, and he should be leading from the front and take ownership for everything that happens. Remember this, there are no bad teams, there's just bad leaders. And so if the family's not doing well, it's your job to fix it. And the mission is upon you. So take ownership for everything. Don't make excuses. Take extreme responsibility, extreme ownership, and let her know, yep, that's right. That's my fault. Number two, you got to validate her. You're going to tell her, totally get how that happens. I totally understand what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. You're right. I have dropped the ball, and I see that by not taking out the trash regularly, how that could make you feel not seen, not heard, and your needs aren't being met. Then you're going to emphasize step three. You're going to tell her, man, I can't imagine what it's like to be in your shoes and to have all of this riddling through your body, all this turmoil, all this angst, all this idea of not knowing if I'm the right one for you. That's a really hard one to do, but you got to do it, guys. You got to empathize and imagine what it would be like to be in her shoes, right? And then the last thing you're going to do in this 4-step process when she says, I want a divorce, is you got to come up with a plan. Women need to know your plan. What is your plan of attack? How are you going to fix this, Mr. Leader? One of the ways you could fix it, and I've seen work with guys to say, hey, listen, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to hire the best men's coach. And I'm going to go work with him for 3 months. And if you don't see anything change in the next 3 months, I know you've given me tons of chances and you've heard this happen all the time, but I've never done anything like this. I've never went out and invested $5,000 in a coach who I have complete commitment to, and I have accountability, and I'm checking in, and I'm going to the group calls, and I'm in the community, and I put a lot of money on the line because that's how bad I want this. and I just enrolled with a coach, and in the next 3 months, if you don't see anything change, then you can walk out. Now, why does this work? Number one is it shows you're leading by creating a plan. Great. But number two is you gave her a deadline. Women don't want to know and have this idea of like the unknown. When safety is an issue, more unknown is not a good thing. It's going to rattle her. It's like, oh, great, I'm going to give you another chance. No. You're not going to give me another chance forever. You're giving me another chance just for 3 months. And you don't have to do anything. I'm going to do all the work. Okay? Having that deadline is really, really important. And that's actually what I did, right? Is I hired a coach and I spent about $5,000. Well, I've spent more than that, but that was one of the things I did. And so I think it would really work for you guys as well. Because remember, when safety is broken, you've got to rebuild trust. And how do you do that? Leadership, guys, always leadership. You got to follow through, action, action, action. No more words. Action is the antidote. Action leads to then connection, which then leads to intimacy and all the things that you guys want. I hope you guys enjoyed this training. This was a big one and a monstrous one, and how to prevent divorce and some of the top strategies. We went longer than normal, but I hope it was worth it. If you're interested in joining my community or learning more about getting access to my Limitless Fathers app that is in app stores right now, and you want access to that and some of the courses, some of the free stuff, some of the paid stuff, or you just want to connect with me one-on-one and get coaching and learn more about my community or working with me and my wife, then just shoot me a DM or drop me a line after this video, and I will get you the details. Have an amazing rest of your week, guys. I hope this was powerful.